It is a great honor and privilege to introduce Rabbi Michael Hasten. We're here in Yerushalayim, and I had the great zchut to meet your father a few years ago when he came here for his grandson's bris. And I've read the books and I've listened to the interviews, and in my opinion, he's one of the greatest modern day Jewish heroes. So if you could let us a little bit about who your father was and what an incredible, inspiring and amazing person.
Yeah, he really was. He really was. He was a very inspiring person. He was very inspired also, permeated completely with Ahavat Yisrael and Ahavat Eretz Yisrael and Torat Yisrael. And he came from a small, probably there were about 1,200 Jewish families that lived in Bohorodchany, Poland, which was in eastern Galicia. Today it's of course part of the Ukraine, not part of Poland today. It was part of Ukraine, and the town was a mixture of both of Polish and Ukrainian nationals. Almost all of them were anti-Semitic, and a large Jewish contingency. And my father came from a family, and his mother's side came from a family, the Halpern family. They were very famous as a family of scholars and merchants for hundreds of years. They'd probably been there, they came from Germany sometime in the 15th century. And they were there for hundreds of years. They had a local tavern. They were involved in the timber business also, and there was an uncle that was in the oil business. Anyway, make a long story short, my grandfather, Alav Hashalom, believed Hitler every word that he was going to wipe out the Jews. And right 2 weeks prior to the German invasion was Operation Barbarossa, where they attacked Russia. Our family had left 2 weeks, and they were constantly 2 weeks ahead of the German front. And my grandfather had tremendous foresight. He was a horse whisperer. He could speak to the horses, and he took another family with him. And every night he would say to the horses, "Today we have to go 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers. The evil ones, the Rishoyim, are behind us, and they want to kill us. So you have to take us another 30 kilometers." And finally, they went fairly far deep into Ukraine. And then tragically, they had to part from the horses. They had to sell the horses, and everybody cried. The horses cried. Our family cried. And they bought train tickets to Tashkent, in the middle of Russia. And I think originally my grandfather wanted to make it somehow by horse and wagon, make it to China or something, just wanted to get out of Europe. And anyway, they had marvelous, difficult adventures, but they managed to stay alive in Stalinist Russia. My father joined the Free Polish Army. Always my grandfather was saying he was a Polish citizen. He wanted to be repatriated after the war, after the Germans would be defeated. He wanted to be repatriated back to Poland. But my father joined. In order to avoid the draft, he said he was 17. He was actually 19. And after Stalingrad, my grandparents allowed him to join the Free Polish Army, which is under Russian military authority. So he joined the Free Polish Army in 1943 or beginning of 43. And my father excelled in engineering, and so he had a truck, and he learned the different how to put up pontoon bridges. And he became a sergeant major in the Free Polish Army. Spoke perfect Russian, perfect Ukrainian, perfect German, of course Yiddish and Hebrew, nothing to talk about. And so he became indispensable to the Russian engineering corps, even though he was a member of the Free Polish Army. Lo and behold, they were operating in the Lublin theater in the middle of 1944, and my father hears about the horrific concentration camp at Majdanek that liquidated the Lubliner Jewry, the finest, the oldest, most important centers. So my father breaks into the camp. He had an armored vehicle, and they broke into the camp. And my father said, that was the lowest level of Ganem that could possibly exist. The gas chambers were still hot, the crematoria. the ones that survived, there were only a few thousand people survived, maybe even less than, maybe a couple thousand. But my father spoke to them in Yiddish, and he said that you're befreit, you're freed now. And they asked my father, Elia Novi, are you, what are you, the Mashiach, Elia Novi? My father spoke to him in Yiddish. He said the Kriya Shema with them, and then he got them food, most important thing, of course. People have been living on rancid potato peels for years. And my father said you had to feed people very slowly that they wouldn't die of toxic shock. And my father said he held people on his lap that were 6 feet tall, that weighed, 40 kilo, 30 kilos, 75 pounds, nothing. And so it was horrific. It was just hell on earth. You can't imagine how horrible it was. But he said after that, he said he always lived Gan Eden. He was always, he said, I saw Ganem, I lived Gan Eden with your mother. And he got them rations, and people afterwards, they said, who freed you? And they said, well, there was a kind of a short Jewish soldier. There was a Gingy. They had like 4 or 5 guns hanging from him that spoke to us in Yiddish. And the same thing happened in January of 45, when they liberated Auschwitz. Is that the people, they wouldn't open the doors to the concentration camp. They thought that the Germans are coming back to finish them off. So they had to, my father brought his armored truck in, and he put a metal plate against the barracks door, and he was shouting in Yiddish, we're from the Polish army, and we're here to free you. And we spoke to them in Yiddish. They opened the doors. He said again, Ganem, it was Ganem. But he said the Russians were very kind, and my father, he worked all the time on rations and getting the doctors and the nurses and the Polish. They said the Russian doctors and the Russian nurses were very kind to the inmates. My father also said, interestingly, afterwards, they all told him that they were Jewish. He said the Jewish doctors, the Jewish Russian doctors, they hid their Jewishness during the time of Stalin, but they were Jewish, and they had tremendous compassion and sympathy. And then the Russians made a big deal out of it. They were taking propaganda films the entire time to show for us how horrible the Third Reich was, how horrible fascism was. But then he met his parents. There was a whole thing. They had been coming back from Russia, and then my father was in Poland. Now my father met up with them and had clothing for them and food for them. It was also an amazing story. I think they met in Lodz. In Lodz is where they actually met. First they went to a place called Wlocław on the western Polish border. Then I think they met actually at Lodz. And there was a whole question of where they should go to. Should they start over again in Poland or get away? But finally, there were pogroms in Poland after the war, and they were coming. My grandpa says, we're not spending another night in Poland. So whatever little bit of money they had, and they had, maybe the gold from the gold teeth there, and a little bit of gold, and maybe some things they captured from the Germans, they managed to bribe a Polish official to let them go to Czechoslovakia, and then eventually to Austria, where they're in the DP camp. My father became very active in the Irgun, and became my grandpa was always a revisionist. He was an Orthodox Jew, of course, but he was a revisionist, very strong revisionist, and great follower of Jabotinsky, and they were very great Zionists. So my father joined the Irgun Tzvai Leumi in 1948. He trained with them in 1947. Then he made his way to France, and the famous arms ship, munition ship, the Alta Lena, which was purchased by Ben Hecht, the great screenwriter from Hollywood. Alta Lena, of course, was the pen name of Jabotinsky, right? It was Zev Jabotinsky that our family were like Hasidim of Jabotinsky. And that Israel would only be won with great sacrifice, and probably without too much compromise with the Arabs also. And so my father joined the Alta Lena, and my father came to Israel, and they got off of the Kfar Yona, and then they got, which is north of around Netanya, then they went south to Tel Aviv Harbor to be able. They wanted to, of course, the whole fight about who would get the munitions. I think that Mar Begin wanted 10% of the munitions to go for the Irgun defenders of the Rova Yehudi, the Jewish quarter in the Ir Atika. And the rest is history. That tragically the elements of the Haganah fired on the ship and blew it up, and Ben Gurion didn't have very nice things to say about the people of Alta Lena. but my father always held him responsible for the death of 17 survivors. Brash Astavsky, the legendary captain of the Alta Lena, died in my father's arms. They had to throw Menachem Begin into the Tel Aviv harbor because he wanted to go down with the ship. And it was a terrible story. But looking back, is that the most remarkable thing that the Civil War didn't break out. My father then went to Machel, Mitnavet Chutz La'aretz. He became a member of the Israeli Defense Forces, and I have all his medals and so on and so forth. Also promoted to the rank of a captain. He was wounded at he fought with the Alexandroni Brigade in the north and in the south, captured Gamal Abdel Nasser, and had many adventures. But he said he couldn't stay in Israel because he couldn't get a job. He wanted to stay here. He wanted to stay. He was a Zionist, big Zionist, but he was discriminated against because he was a member of the revisionists and the Histadrut and the different leftist union organizations were not allowing Irgun members to be mainstreamed into Jewish life, into economic life. So my father went back to Europe, joined his parents in the near Salzburg in their DP camp, and then they eventually migrated to America. My father to Canada, my grandparents to Minneapolis, Minnesota. They made friends with my mother's family, and they made a shidduch between my father and my mother. My mother was an American girl growing up in America, and so they fell in love. And then my mother went to Montreal, and they got married by the Tosha Rebbe. My father eventually migrated back to America with my mother. That's where their parents lived, and my father eventually went to school, became a great engineer, had 21 patents, and he built a magnificent business together with his brother and his partner, my uncle Hasten. He should live and be well. And they were, Baruch Hashem, very successful and very, very philanthropic. They started the Hasten Hebrew Academy in Indianapolis. My father was the chairman of the board of Touro College, very involved in education, and a huge Zionist. We were, from 1973 on, we came to Israel often. I got married, then eventually we built a home here in Beit Dagan. My father and I, our family all lived in, and he's a great Zionist. And he's buried in Israel. He's buried in Ra'anana. He passed away, it was like Mordechai Yehudi, passed away on Moshe Rabbeinu's Yortzeit. He actually died in Gimel, but his Yortzeit, that was the day that we actually buried him, was Zion Adar. And my father's buried in Ra'anana in the traditional section there. My father loved Israel, invested heavily in Israel. We're still heavily invested here in different projects we're doing, and of course heavily in real estate. A great lover of Zion, great lover of the Jewish people, as is my mother. She shouldn't be well. She's an elderly woman today. And my uncle Hart, very, very strong Zionist, and fighting for Israel for as long as I can remember. As a matter of fact, in the 1967 war, my father was so scared of another Holocaust that he traveled to Chicago. He was the top designer and chief designer and engineer for General Mills, the famous cereal makers and food manufacturers. And my father said, "Listen, I've got to do something important." He went to the Israeli embassy. He said, "I fought in the '48 war, and I can still hold the gun. I'm going to go fight for Israel again." So in 1967, he volunteered. Although by the time they could get to the paperwork, I think the war was over. It was done, and it was a mad time with great miracles. And my father always felt it was miraculous, the 6 Day War, and it just heightened such a sense of closeness. And my father was very upset the way that he was treated, as were all the revisionists were treated by the Ben Gurion government and the Moshe Sharet, and he was very upset about that. And he held it against Ben Gurion that he fired on the Alta Lena and that so many Holocaust survivors died. But at the end, he did. After that, especially with the triumph of Begin and the Likud in the 1977 elections, it was a different country. And my father invested heavily, started companies here, and was always about, he wanted to buy a bank here, almost got the bank. But Israel meant everything. He was either going to Israel or coming back from Israel from 1973 on. And he loved the land of Israel. He loved the Jewish people. He loved everything about Jewish history and anything to do with Judaism, and he devoted his life to Jewish education and general education. My father believed heavily in education, and he was became very friendly with Dr. Bernard Lander, already from the 80s on, and my father's real estate genius really drove Touro to becoming a great institution. Where it had, a few thousand students. Now it's, tens of thousands of students. My father started the medical school for Shomer Shabbos children, Shomer Shabbos students, and the dental school. Those were very, very important to my father, and he was very active until the end, till he was in his mid-90s, and just a great, great man, a great father. We were best friends, and he was very, very supportive of all of his children, his grandchildren, and then so many other people also. During the shift, I got calls from people, I was a poor man, your father paid for my children's wedding. I never heard anything about it. So many mitzvahs. But the main thing is my father was very, I wouldn't say proud of the fact, but he seemed to have a tremendous sense of inspiration, the fact that he was able to liberate both Majdanek and Auschwitz, and speak to the inmates in Yiddish and get them their first rations. My father, and I have no doubt when he went to Shemayim that all those thousands of neshamas that he liberated, and their children and their families were there to greet my father with giving him a big yeshikoyach and thanking him for. Because my father really gave life to these people. They were starving to death. They might have gotten help in other ways too, but he really facilitated it in speaking so many languages, how he organized. He said he felt if that went back, it was more than his family, more than anything, more than Touro, more than anything, his greatest sense of accomplishment was be able to help the survivors, the moments after liberation, to make sure that they could survive further and have productive lives. He said it was very, very grueling, but it gave him a sense of great accomplishment, and he thanked Hashem every day. My father, the last year of his life, my father was already, was very weak, but he would cry and thank Hashem for saving him in situation after situation, during the war and after the war in Israel, getting wounded and recovering, and said Hashem was with me every single second. I never can forget it. So he was a great man, great man. He was a confidant of Mar Begin, of Menachem Begin, of Vice President Pence. My uncle made the shidduch between Trump and Vice President Pence, between President Trump, Vice President Pence. He said, listen, we've got a great governor in Indiana. We know him for years. I introduced Mike Pence to my father probably 30 years ago, and they became good friends, and they recommended him to Trump, and Trump took him as Vice President. The rest is history. Mike Pence is a big friend of Israel, very big friend of Israel, as are all the evangelicals that love Israel extraordinarily. And it's not just the converters. That's what people say. I don't know any of them. So I'm only gonna love Israel because if you have to you have to convert to Christianity. I never heard anybody even say that, suggest that. Just that they felt that we're God's chosen people and that we have to do everything possible to strengthen Israel and to safeguard Israel. So it was a great life. He was a very inspirational person. Loved Yerushalayim. I remember when I got engaged to Yerushalmis, my father said at my vort, he said in Yiddish, he said, I told my wife, if I'm not here, I'm in Yerushalayim.
Wow.
That's how much I love Yerushalayim. He said in Yiddish to all the Yiddish-speaking Mechutanim, which is a great thing. There was something to be said for Yiddish. My father spoke a beautiful Yiddish, and he could speak to my wife's family in Yiddish. They were part of the old Yeshuv, the Yerushalayimers for many generations. My father spoke to them comfortably in Ivrit and in Yiddish. And he was just a fantastic Jew, great father, great man, very loving, very inspiring, and inspired himself to do great things. So the only thing I could do is for him to say Kaddish. That's all. So I said Kaddish is, during Corona, it's not so easy. So I made up the Kaddish for him, and that's how Dr. Glassman and I became friends. We went to the same minyan, and
we said it together.
We said it together. We stood near each other and said Kaddish together. I just stopped saying, said, okay, that's enough tashlum and that's enough makeup Kaddish. But
Rav, can I ask you, what message did your father impart on you and the family?
What?
Did he have a central message? Or
yes, that every Jew should be loyal to every Jewish person, especially loyal to Medinat Yisrael. Very important to love Medinat Yisrael. No matter whatever type of Zionist you are, even if you're the Turk Artnik, you have to love Medinat Yisrael. You can be against political philosophy, you can live your life the way you are, but You have to love the land of Israel. You have to love the land of Israel, and you have to love the Jewish people, uncompromisingly from that standpoint. That was his message, and that's the way he lived his life.
If you could show the picture of your grandparents.
Yeah, sure.
And I think one of the most amazing thing about your grandmother is that she kept kashrut all the years.
Oh yeah, she kept kashrut during the World War, and she kept Shabbat as much as possible during World War II. She was fighting all the time for Yiddishkeit in the family. It was very difficult, and people were pushing everything aside because of the situation. But she was steadfast, and she wrote a beautiful calendar. She kept the calendar, and they baked matzahs, and they did they were here in Alma, this little Bavarf in a little Russian town that had factories, and they were baking matzahs and trying to keep Shabbos. They would daven Rosh and Yom Kippur. They kept the lookout. They got a shofar. It's unbelievable. It was very hard to maintain Jewish life during World War II, but she did it.
And she lived till over 100.
She lived to be 102 years, maybe 104. We were very close. I know Yiddish because of my parents. Yiddish was their secret language. We were not, but she taught me Yiddish. She taught me Yiddish, and I didn't know I could speak Yiddish. And I went to yeshiva, and I could speak to the older European Rebbeim in Yiddish. And I came to Eretz Yisrael, I could speak to the Yerushalmi Yidden in Yiddish. They were like, "Whoa, this guy from Indiana can speak Yiddish." I said, they asked me how is that possible. So I had a grandmother that spoke to me in Yiddish, only Yiddish. She insisted I learn Yiddish, and I was arguing with her over and over again. What a mistake! I love to speak Yiddish. I speak Glaziano Yiddish and Hungarian and Hasidic Yiddish, but my favorite is Yerushalmi Yiddish, which has a very distinct flavor to it and has a special ring to it.
Can I ask, one of the reasons why she lived till such a she had the zchut to live till over 100 is that your grandparents did everything to help any Yid.
Anything to help another Yid. Yeah, there's no question. We definitely attribute the Arichas Yomim that my Bubby had to her uncompromising ways of helping Jews in the most amazing ways, hiding them from the NKVD and fighting for Yiddishkeit every inch of the way was with great clever. And she was also scholarly. She had private malamdim in Europe that taught her. She spoke Yiddish. She got very along with my wife's aunts. They spoke in Yiddish together. You have a Jew from Eretz Yisrael and a Jew from Galicia, and they understood each other perfectly. It was something about Yiddish was really the language of Ashkenazic Jews for thousands of years, maybe at least for 1,000 years, and they spoke to each other in Yiddish. So it was a remarkable thing.
I just want to thank you. I'm just going to come for 1
pleasure.
second. So Rav, this has been for me the greatest honor and privilege to meet you and to read the most remarkable story about your father and your father's brother, two heroes that there are no words because they were fearless. They were fearless. But as partners, they created and
wonderful.
They are such an inspiration to us all.
Right.
I just want to mention your father. Not only was he involved with organizing for Cheerios, for Pringles,
right,
and straw.
Right.
That in alone would make him so well known and famous. But it was what he did during the war and what he did here for Eretz Yisrael that was his greatest, and his family was his greatest joy.
Absolutely. Very good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you enough.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And you should just have mazel bracha and
amen. Thank you.
You really come from an most amazing, and you've continued the legacy.
Not really, but
thank you.